My daughter told me, "We got married yesterday without you." When I called to ask about the final wedding preparations we'd been planning together for 8 months. 26 years of being the most important man in Jessica's life, walking her through every milestone since her mother died. And this is how she repaid my love. Getting married in secret while I waited at home, expecting to walk her down the aisle. If you've ever been cut out of the biggest day of your child's life, if you've ever had your own blood choose strangers over the parent who raised them, grab some coffee and settle in. This story's got more heartbreak than a country song, but stick around for the ending. And if you like tales about family loyalty being tested by money and social pressure, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got more stories about people who forget where they came from until life reminds them what really matters. I'm always here with fresh wisdom about the difference between the family that raises you and the family that uses you. I'd been so excited about Jessica's wedding day. We'd spent months planning everything together. The flowers, the music, the menu for the reception at the VFW hall that I'd helped book and pay for. Jessica had always been my princess, especially after her mother Margaret died when Jess was 16. We'd become a team, just the two of us against the world, and I thought walking her down the aisle would be the proudest moment of my life. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while I was working late in my auto shop, putting finishing touches on a customer's transmission so I could take Thursday and Friday off for wedding preparations. "Hey, sweetheart," I said when I saw Jessica's name on my phone. "I'm just closing up here. Tomorrow we need to pick up your flowers and make sure the church has everything ready for Saturday." I was already planning the timeline in my head, making sure every detail would be perfect for my little girl's special day. Jessica's voice was different, cold, distant, like she was talking to a stranger instead of the father who'd raised her alone for 10 years. "Dad, about the wedding. We need to talk." Something in her tone made my stomach drop, but I tried to stay positive. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind? Did something go wrong with the caterer? We can fix whatever it is." I was already mentally running through backup plans, ready to solve any problem that threatened her happiness. That's when she delivered the words that felt like a punch to the gut. "We got married yesterday without you. David and I had a small ceremony with his family, and we're leaving for our honeymoon tonight." The casual way she said it, like she was reporting the weather instead of destroying her father's heart, made the betrayal even more painful. No explanation, no apology, just a simple statement that I'd been erased from the most important day of her life. The silence that followed stretched forever while I tried to process what she'd just told me. All our planning, all our conversations about the wedding, all my excitement about walking my daughter down the aisle, it had all been meaningless to her. While I was working extra hours to pay for her special day, she was making arrangements to exclude me from it entirely. "Jessica," I finally managed to say, "what are you talking about? We've been planning this wedding together for months. The church is booked, the reception is paid for, your dress is hanging in my closet waiting for Saturday." But even as I said the words, I knew something had fundamentally changed between us, and I was about to discover just how much my little girl had been influenced by people who saw me as an embarrassment, rather than the man who'd sacrificed everything to give her a good life. Jessica wasn't always someone who could break her father's heart with casual cruelty. She was my miracle baby, born to me and Margaret when we'd been trying for kids for 5 years and had almost given up hope. I was 28, working as a mechanic at Johnson's Auto Repair, and Margaret was teaching 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary. When Jessica arrived with her bright blue eyes and perfect little fingers, she made our small house feel like a palace filled with laughter and possibility. Those early years were golden, even though money was tight. I'd work on cars all day, come home covered in grease to find Margaret reading to baby Jessica, or teaching her to clap her hands to children's songs. We'd have family dinners at our little kitchen table, Jessica in her high chair making more mess than she ate, while Margaret and I talked about our dreams for our daughter's future. "She's going to be something special," Margaret would say, wiping applesauce off Jessica's face. "She's got your determination and my stubbornness." When Jessica started school, she was the kind of kid every parent hopes for. Smart, funny, popular with her classmates but never mean to the kids who struggled. She'd bring home art projects covered in glue and glitter, stories she'd written about princesses who fixed cars like Daddy, and report cards that made Margaret and me beam with pride. "My daddy can fix anything that's broken," she'd tell her teachers when they asked about career day presentations. I felt 10 feet tall when she talked about me like I was her hero. Margaret's death when Jessica was 16 changed everything for both of us. Cancer took her quickly, and suddenly, I was a single father trying to run a business while helping a teenage daughter navigate grief, high school, and all the challenges that come with growing up. But Jessica and I became closer through our shared loss, learning to lean on each other in ways that made our bond even stronger. "It's just you and me now, Dad," she'd say while helping me with paperwork or bringing me sandwiches when I worked late. "We're a team." I worked harder than ever to give Jessica everything she'd lost when Margaret died. Dance lessons, college prep courses, a car for her 16th birthday that I rebuilt from the ground up in my spare time. When she got accepted to nursing school with a partial scholarship, I was so proud, I cried. "Mom would be so proud of you," I told her at graduation, watching her in that cap and gown that represented years of sacrifice and determination. "You're everything we dreamed you'd become." Jessica's college years were tough financially, but we made it work together. I took on extra jobs, worked weekends, and did whatever it took to keep her in school without student loans. She'd come home for holidays and summer breaks, helping in the shop and telling me about her classes, her friends, and eventually David Mitchell, the law student she'd met during her clinical rotations at the hospital. "He's really smart, Dad," she'd say, showing me photos of a young man in expensive clothes who looked like he'd never worked with his hands in his life. I was happy Jessica had found love, but concerned about the distance it seemed to create between us. David came from money, old family wealth, country club memberships, the kind of background that made me feel out of place when I met his parents at Jessica's nursing school graduation. "Your daughter is remarkable," his mother Patricia had said in a tone that suggested surprise that someone from my background could raise such an accomplished child. I should have recognized the warning signs in that comment, but I was too proud of Jessica to notice the subtle condescension that would eventually drive a wedge between my daughter and me. The changes in Jessica started subtly after she began spending more time with David's family, particularly his mother Patricia Mitchell, who seemed to take my daughter under her wing with the intensity of someone on a mission. "Mrs. Mitchell has been so helpful with wedding planning," Jessica would tell me after spending weekends at their country estate. "She knows all the best vendors and has such sophisticated taste. She's teaching me about proper etiquette and social expectations." I was grateful someone was helping her, but concerned about why Jessica suddenly felt she needed lessons in being proper. Patricia Mitchell's influence became more obvious as Jessica started questioning decisions we'd made together about her wedding. The VFW hall we'd booked was suddenly too casual for the kind of celebration David's family expected. The local florist I'd recommended was not the caliber of vendor that would be appropriate for their social circle. Even the church where Jessica had been baptized and confirmed was deemed not prestigious enough for a ceremony that would include David's family's business associates and social connections. Jessica began using phrases and expressing opinions that didn't sound like her at all. "Dad, I'm learning that presentation matters more than I realized," she'd say when suggesting changes to our wedding plans. "David's family moves in circles where every detail reflects on your character and social standing. I want to make sure our wedding represents the kind of people we're becoming, not just where we came from." The dismissive way she said "where we came from" felt like a rejection of everything I'd given her. The financial pressure intensified as Jessica's expectations grew under Patricia's guidance. The simple, beautiful wedding we'd planned together was being transformed into an elaborate social event that would cost more than I made in 6 months. "Mrs. Mitchell says she can help with some of the expenses," Jessica would mention when I expressed concern about the budget. "The Mitchells have connections with vendors who might give us discounts in exchange for the social exposure." I didn't want charity from people who looked down on me, but Jessica seemed eager to accept help that would elevate her wedding beyond my means. Jessica's attitude toward me began changing in ways that hurt more than the budget concerns. She'd correct my grammar when I spoke to David's family, apologize for my work clothes when they visited my shop, and seemed embarrassed by the life we'd built together. "Dad, maybe you could wear something nicer when we meet with the wedding planner," she'd suggest. "And perhaps don't mention the specific details of your work. David's family isn't really familiar with blue-collar professions." My daughter was being taught to be ashamed of her father. The final warning sign came when Jessica started having private conversations with Patricia about wedding details that excluded me entirely. "Mrs. Mitchell and I are handling the more complex aspects of planning. Jessica would explain when I asked about decisions being made without my input. Things like guest list management and vendor coordination require experience with high-end social events. Don't worry, Dad. You'll still walk me down the aisle and give your speech at the reception. But the way she said it made me feel like a tolerated guest at my own daughter's wedding. The most painful part was watching Jessica lose herself in Patricia's vision of who she should become. My confident, independent daughter was transforming into someone who second-guessed her own opinions and deferred to Patricia's judgment about everything from her dress to her honeymoon plans. "I want to do this right," Jessica would say when I questioned why she was letting someone else control her wedding. "Mrs. Mitchell knows about these things, and I don't want to embarrass David or his family by making mistakes." She was so focused on fitting into their world that she was abandoning the world that had made her who she was. The week before the wedding, Jessica's behavior became increasingly secretive and distant. She'd take phone calls in another room, claim to be too busy with final preparations to spend time together, and avoid discussing details about the ceremony that we'd supposedly been planning as a team. "Everything's under control, Dad," she'd say when I asked about last-minute arrangements. "Mrs. Mitchell has handled all the coordination. Just be ready to look handsome in your tuxedo on Saturday." But something in her voice suggested Saturday wasn't going to unfold the way I'd been expecting. The morning before the supposed wedding day, Jessica came to my shop while I was finishing up work early so I could focus on final preparations. She looked nervous and couldn't make eye contact when she asked if we could talk privately in my office. "Dad, there's been a change of plans with the wedding," she began, and my heart immediately started racing with concern about what had gone wrong. "Is David okay? Did something happen with the church?" I asked, ready to fix whatever crisis had arisen. Jessica's explanation was delivered with the kind of rehearsed precision that suggested she'd practiced this conversation multiple times. "David's family has offered to host the wedding at their country club, with all the expenses covered in a much more elegant setting than what we originally planned." She was speaking fast, like she wanted to get through the words before I could interrupt. "It's an incredible opportunity, and it would mean so much to David to have his family's support for our special day." The catch came in the form of what Jessica called space limitations and guest list management. The country club venue could only accommodate a certain number of people, and David's family had business associates and social obligations that required most of the available spots. "Dad, I know this is disappointing, but the guest list had to be prioritized based on David's family's relationships and professional considerations." She was trying to make it sound like a logistical problem rather than a deliberate exclusion. When I asked directly whether I was invited to this new wedding arrangement, Jessica's composure finally cracked. "Mrs. Mitchell thinks it would be better if this ceremony focused on bringing our two families together in their social circle," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "She's concerned that mixing different social backgrounds might create uncomfortable situations for everyone involved." My own daughter was telling me I was too embarrassing to attend her wedding. The cruelest part was Jessica's attempt to soften the blow by promising a second celebration that would include me and our friends from the neighborhood. "We'll have a party at the VFW hall like we originally planned," she said, reaching for my hand that I pulled away instinctively. "It'll be more relaxed and fun without all the pressure of formal social expectations. You can give your speech and we can dance to the songs we picked out together." She was asking me to attend a fake reception while she had her real wedding without me. I stared at my daughter, this person I'd raised alone for 10 years, worked extra jobs to put through nursing school, loved unconditionally through every phase of her life, and realized that Patricia Mitchell had successfully convinced her that her father wasn't good enough to witness the most important day of her life. "Jessica," I said quietly, "are you really going to exclude the man who raised you because his social status embarrasses your new family?" The question hung in the air between us, and her inability to answer it told me everything I needed to know about how completely she'd been manipulated into choosing status over love. For 6 months after Jessica's secret wedding, I heard nothing from my daughter except a brief thank you card for the wedding gift I'd sent, despite not being invited to the ceremony. The silence was deafening. No phone calls, no visits, no updates about her new married life. I'd drive past the Mitchell estate sometimes, seeing Jessica's car in the driveway, and knowing she was less than a mile from my house, but might as well have been on another planet. The daughter who used to call me every few days had completely disappeared from my life. The first crack in Jessica's perfect new world came through my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter worked at the hospital where Jessica was employed. Bob, I don't like to gossip, but Carla mentioned that your Jessica seems different at work lately. She told me over the fence one evening. Quiet, stressed, not the cheerful girl everyone knew before her marriage. Carla asked if everything was okay, and Jessica just said married life was an adjustment. The word adjustment didn't sound like the happiness I'd hoped my daughter would find. 3 months later, I ran into Father Michael O'Connor at the grocery store, and his question confirmed my growing suspicions that something was wrong. Bob, I haven't seen Jessica at Mass lately, and she used to be such a regular. Is she attending services at a different parish now? When I explained that I honestly didn't know anything about Jessica's life anymore, Father Michael's expression grew concerned. That's unusual for Jessica. She always valued her faith community and family connections. I hope everything's all right with her. The breakthrough came 8 months after the wedding, when Jessica appeared at my shop on a Tuesday afternoon, looking like a shadow of the confident woman who'd graduated nursing school. She was thinner, her usual bright energy replaced by something that looked like exhaustion mixed with defeat. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked quietly, glancing around nervously like she was afraid someone might see her there. "I need to tell you some things about my marriage that I should have told you months ago." Jessica's story poured out in a rush of words that revealed the reality behind her perfect, social climbing marriage. David's family hadn't just excluded me from the wedding. They'd systematically excluded Jessica from any decision-making about her own life. "They control everything, Dad," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Where we live, what I wear, who I can be friends with, even how I spend the money I earn at the hospital. Patricia picks out my clothes and criticizes everything about how I was raised." The worst part was learning how David had revealed his true character once the wedding was over, and Jessica was legally tied to his family's expectations. "He's not the man I thought he was, Dad. He agrees with everything his mother says about me needing to be improved and refined. He's embarrassed by my background, by my job, by the fact that my father is a mechanic instead of a doctor or lawyer. My daughter had traded her loving family for people who saw her as a project to be fixed rather than a person to be valued. Jessica's breaking point had come when Patricia demanded she quit her nursing job, because wives in their social circle don't work in service professions. The career she'd worked so hard for, the calling that had driven her through nursing school, was considered beneath the dignity of a Mitchell family member. "That's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake, Dad," Jessica said, reaching for my hand that this time I didn't pull away. "I chose people who want to erase everything I am over the man who made me everything I could become." The question hanging between us was whether it was too late to undo the damage she'd done to our relationship. Jessica had chosen social status over family loyalty, had excluded me from her wedding to please people who would never really accept her anyway. But looking at my broken daughter, the little girl who used to bring me art projects and tell everyone her daddy could fix anything, I realized that some things are more important than pride, and love sometimes means forgiving people for hurting you when they were too lost to know better. Jessica's return to my life wasn't immediate or simple. After our emotional conversation at the shop, she went back to her marriage for another month, trying to make it work despite knowing she'd made a terrible mistake. "I kept thinking I could prove to them that I belonged in their world," she told me later. "But the harder I tried to be what they wanted, the more I lost myself." The final straw came when Patricia demanded Jessica sign papers giving David control over her nursing license and professional credentials. The night Jessica left David was a Thursday in November, cold and raining, when she showed up at my front door with 2 suitcases and her nursing school diploma. "Dad, I know I don't deserve your help after what I did to you," she said, standing in the rain like a lost child. "But I didn't know where else to go. David's family has made it clear that if I leave with nothing but what I can carry." She was shivering from cold and fear, but her eyes held a determination I hadn't seen since before she'd gotten involved with the Mitchells. Letting Jessica back into my house was easy. She was still my daughter, and I'd loved her through worse things than poor judgment about marriage. But rebuilding trust between us required honest conversations about how she'd been willing to abandon me for social acceptance. "I was so desperate to fit into their world that I convinced myself you'd understand," she admitted during one of our late-night talks. "Patricia made me believe that loyalty to David meant choosing his family over yours." Jessica's divorce proceedings revealed the full extent of how controlling the Mitchell family had become. They'd isolated her from friends, monitored her spending, and created a prenuptial agreement that would leave her with almost nothing if the marriage ended. They never saw me as David's wife, Jessica explained to her lawyer and me. They saw me as an acquisition that needed to be controlled and shaped into their image of acceptable. The legal battle would be expensive and difficult, but Jessica was determined to reclaim her independence. The community support for Jessica's decision surprised both of us. Father Michael, Mrs. Rodriguez, her former co-workers at the hospital. Everyone who'd known Jessica before her marriage rallied around her when they learned she was escaping what they'd suspected was an unhealthy situation. "We could see you weren't yourself," her nursing supervisor told her when she returned to work. "You'd lost that spark that made you such a special caregiver. We're glad you found your way back to who you really are." The most meaningful moment in our reconciliation came when Jessica asked if she could help me with a particularly difficult transmission repair that required 2 sets of hands. Working side by side in my shop, teaching her the same mechanical skills I'd tried to share when she was younger, felt like reclaiming the father-daughter relationship we'd built before David's family had poisoned it. "I missed this, Dad," she said, handing me tools and listening to my explanations. "I missed being your daughter instead of trying to be someone else's idea of perfect." Jessica's growth through the divorce process showed me the strength and integrity that the Mitchell family had tried to suppress. She refused settlement offers that would have given her money in exchange for silence about their treatment of her, choosing instead to tell the truth about psychological manipulation and financial control that had characterized her marriage. "Some things are more important than money," she told the mediator, "like self-respect and family loyalty." Hearing her defend those values reminded me why I'd been so proud of her before she'd gotten lost in someone else's world. By Christmas, Jessica had moved back into her old bedroom, was working full-time at the hospital again, and had legally reclaimed her maiden name. We decorated the tree together like we used to, sharing memories of holidays with Margaret, and making plans for a future that honored our family traditions instead of abandoning them for social climbing aspirations. "I'm sorry it took me so long to remember who I really am," Jessica said as we hung ornaments Margaret had collected over the years. "But I'm grateful you never stopped being my dad, even when I stopped being your daughter." 1 year later, I'm sitting in the front pew of St. Mary's Church watching Jessica renew her commitment to the values and relationships that really matter, not through another wedding, but through her acceptance into the parish's lay ministry program. She's chosen to dedicate her time to helping women escape abusive and controlling relationships, using her experience with the Mitchell family to guide others who've lost themselves in toxic marriages. "I want to help women recognize the warning signs I ignored," she tells groups of young women considering marriage. "Love should never require you to abandon your family or your authentic self." Jessica's divorce was finalized 6 months ago, and while the legal battle was expensive and emotionally draining, she emerged from it stronger and more self-aware than she'd been before her marriage. The Mitchell family's attempts to destroy her reputation in their social circles backfired when Jessica's honesty and integrity became obvious to everyone who knew her story. "She chose truth over comfort," Father Michael said during a sermon about moral courage. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is admit we've made mistakes and work to make them right. My daughter and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation stronger than it was before her marriage tested our bond. We've learned to communicate more openly about difficult topics, and Jessica now understands the difference between love that lifts you up and manipulation that tears you down. Dad, I know now that your values aren't old-fashioned or embarrassing, she told me during one of our evening walks around the neighborhood. They're the foundation that made me strong enough to eventually recognize and escape from people who wanted to control me. The most healing aspect of our reconciliation has been Jessica's relationship with our extended community. She's reconnected with childhood friends, resumed her volunteer work at the food bank, and become a regular presence at neighborhood gatherings that she'd abandoned during her marriage. I forgot how good it feels to be with people who knew me before I tried to become someone else, she said after a barbecue at Mrs. Rodriguez's house. These people love me for who I am, not who they think I should become. Jessica has started dating again, but this time with the wisdom that comes from experience with manipulation and control. Tom Morrison, a paramedic she met through her hospital work, treats her with the respect and genuine affection that she deserves. He's impressed by her strength and independence, not threatened by it, and he values her close relationship with me instead of trying to compete with it. I want to meet the man who raised such an incredible woman, he told Jessica after they'd been dating for a few months. Looking back on the pain of being excluded from Jessica's wedding, I realized that crisis forced both of us to examine what really matters in family relationships. Jessica learned that authentic love doesn't require you to abandon your principles or your family, and I learned that forgiveness can be more powerful than pride when someone you love makes mistakes and works to correct them. Dad, I know I can never undo the hurt I caused by choosing them over you, Jessica said on the anniversary of her secret wedding, but I hope I can spend the rest of our lives showing you that I remember now who I really am and who really loves me. The best part of our story is that it's not really about the betrayal or even the forgiveness. It's about the discovery that genuine family bonds are strong enough to survive mistakes and wise enough to become stronger through surviving them. Jessica and I have both learned that love worth having is love that sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. Love that supports your growth instead of demanding your transformation. And love that celebrates your authentic self instead of trying to replace it with someone else's vision of who you should be.